Welcome to Welcome in Jesus Bible Study. We're going to be in the book of First Peter, chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. 17. Honor all men. Love thy brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the king. 18. Servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and the gentle, but also to the forward. And I'll repeat those. 17. Honor all men. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the king. 18. Servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the forward. Jesus is King of Kings, a God of gods, who came down to us in the flesh to be a servant. Why? Because we are all servants. We are all slaves to something. Well, what are we all slaves to? Our sin, our jobs, our spouse, our parents, our children. We may not like the word slave and its meaning, but the truth of the matter is it exists. Slavery has always existed and still does today. Now, at certain times in our history, it has held a very dark and horrific title and meaning. Throughout history, we can see time and time again where slavery was just horrible. Very horrible. God bless all those people who was slaves during the specific timing and during those certain eras, because we have it, when we made not only in foreign countries, but also here in America. The list can go on between the English and the Scottish, the blacks and the white. We still do horrific things to the Native American people today, and people don't talk about it. But we have in foreign countries where, we just have kings, or should we even call them government? Look at North Korea. I mean, we can go on and on and on with the list of the horrificness of slavery, and we can also deny ourselves the truth to say that slavery doesn't exist. But in fact, it does, and always has, and it always will. As long as there's people on this earth, there is evil. And as long as there's evil, there is always going to be somebody who places themselves with pride and arrogance to think that they are higher and better and above all people. There's a lot of people like to argue that slavery, existed in the Bible and that God condoned it. Yes, it was in the Bible, but God didn't condone it. It was just a thing that always is and is. And we could sit there and dissect it right now. But I'm going to tell you right now, the same type of slavery that is mentioned in the Bible, besides when God gave his people over to the enemy. He gave his people over to the enemy. The enemy did evil and did slavery amongst the people. God didn't condone it. In fact, many times it shows us over and over again how God rescued his people up out of bondage and out of slavery. In fact, God equals freedom. He frees us from bondage. He frees us from slavery. And though we will always be subject, because we are subjects, we are servants, we are slaves to something, and we all serve a master. We have to choose which master we want to serve. Are we going to serve the master of this world, which is money, sin, anything pertaining or is of this world? We could be a slave to. Or are we going to be slave to God? and his kingdom and his righteousness? Are we going to be his faithful, humble servants in his kingdom? We have to make a choice, because we are a slave to something. Something is our master. Whether we want to believe that we are these free human beings or not, the truth is we are a servant to something. Right now, even the modern house, just because you have this blue collar job, or you're living middle class or high class, you are still being a slave to something. Now, most of the time in the Bible, when it speaks of servants, it's not speaking of slavery like when the Egypts was enslaved, when the Israelites was enslaved to Egypt. Servants, we have got it all twisted up, is no different than we right now who own debts to mortgages. If you have a mortgage, if you have a car note, if you have ever taken out a loan, you are a servant to the things that you owe money to. And see, back in the Bible times, they didn't have banks who gave out mortgage loans. They didn't have banks who gave out car notes. They didn't have banks that just gave you out a loan to do here and that. What you had was people who had more, enough to share. And if they lent you and gave you a couple of goats or a couple of sheep, or gave you some land that belonged to them, you were now a servant to them until you paid off your debt. So a lot of people get it all twisted up in the Bible when it calls people servants and handmaidens, for that's what they were. No more than people or family members who had went and gathered some things that they personally did not have or own from somebody who had more than enough to give and to share. And they had to work it off. And that's how you became a servant. That's how people got loans back in those days. Your family worked for that family until your family paid off all debts. And here's a little intriguing note that I don't think nobody's ever caught on before, but the government even used to hold this true to this day, that after 7 years, all debts should be forgiven. You ever wondered why? Which they're still supposed to be doing today, so I don't know, but even if you had back in the day, if you had like hospital bills or whatever, if you owed a debt to something and you had not paid it off, if you ever wondered why all of a sudden after 7 years it was forgiven or forgotten, because the government was still holding true to what God said back in the times, and you can go look it up in the Old Testament, that in the year of Jubilee, that after 7 years that you are to let go of your manservants, whether he had paid off his debt, the money that he owed or not. Now, I can't remember exactly where it is, but I know you can go on Google and just type in the words, where does it say in the Bible, after 7 years, all debt is forgiven, and it shall pop up. And the government likes to deny God and likes to take him out. But the whole government system originally was based on the word of God. Obey the laws of God. Why? Because not even the government is above the law of God. And as we are subjects to the government, because the government, so-called, is our king, but not the king in how we approach Jesus, because Jesus, nobody's above God and nobody's above Jesus. But we are their subjects, and we are slave to them, and we have to obey them. And that's why it says that we are to obey all of our masters and honor them, whether they are good to us or whether they are bad to us. Why? Because God will be our vengeance. We will, when he tells us to obey all of them, we will be rewarded for our actions. We will be rewarded for our obedience. But God will take care of those who are evil and mistreat the people. So if they are in charge of us, like the government is, they will have to answer to God for their actions and the way that they have cheated us. So we are to be good and faithful servants, but mostly to God. God is above all else.